It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Welcome to omitdefeatradio. I am your host, Unreal Dean, and joining me today is your other host, Stormcool.
Who doesn't think that you can hear me?
Oh, they can hear you, they can hear you. And today we are talking about
Umbrella Academy, the Netflix series.
which was once a comic book series. That's what it's based on, and it stars Ellen Page and Tom Hopper, and yeah,
Other mentionable
mentionables,
characters, names, famous actors, actresses.
and all those people. And this is all, based on a comic book by a guy named Gerard Way, who created this wonderful comic book called The Umbrella Academy about some special kids. 8 of them, I think. 8 kids who were born with special powers, all adopted by some crazy billionaire guy or rich guy who has a talking chimpanzee. And yeah, this is going to be following the life story of these dysfunctional superheroes. It's all on you now, Stone Cool.
Okay, so let's just jump into it and give a. I would like to talk about each character individually. Uh, well, the heroes at least, and they get introduced to the world as this group of kids who take down a bunch of bank robbers with guns, and they're all dressed like prep school kids with blazers and whatnot, and they have domino masks on their faces, so you cannot see who they are.
Yeah, like, like that mask has ever worked.
Looking at you, Robin, from Batman and Robin.
Yeah, Grayson.
Anyway, back to this. So, these guys are all born at the same time to women who were not pregnant in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, there was like 47 of them or something like that.
There were quite a few, yes. And then this billionaire guy, he basically adopted
8 of them.
the 8 that he could find.
Yeah.
Or at least, that the mothers were willing to
give up for adoption.
For a price.
Yeah.
So, I really want to talk about Luther first, because I admire his character the most, probably.
Okay.
And why I say that is because some bad things go down. For example, one of the siblings actually dies. Oh, sorry, spoiler alert. And after that happens, things just start falling apart, and the kids start leaving the house one by one to pursue their own careers, their own lives, live their own futures. And this is partially because their billionaire father, who they refer to as father, is a bit of he's a harsh taskmaster. Yeah. He's always pushing them to give their maximum effort, plus 10, plus 100. And for most of them, this is too much. And when they become young adults, they realize, we don't have to stick around here anymore. But Luther is the one who stayed up until the very end. And he even spent a few years, I think it was 4 years, on a moon settlement, just gathering samples. And what ends up bringing all the kids back together is the news of their father passing away.
Yeah.
So they all meet back at the mansion, and everybody is quote unquote happy to see each other. Yeah, not really.
It depends on who's meeting who.
Yeah, so Luther is the strong one, and when I say the strong one, I literally mean in strength and in mind.
Yeah,
And
he's got super strength,
he has super strength,
some durability along with it.
and he was not always the massive guy he was. He was actually a regular built, okay, taller than average, but very regular, well built individual. And the reason he looks the way he does now is because, in order to save his life, he was injected with a serum.
Yeah.
And this serum made him hulk out a bit and get really hairy.
Yeah.
Because it comes from chimpanzee DNA or something crazy like that.
Or a gorilla.
Gorilla, maybe. Yeah. And this just gives you a bit more insight as to what father was up to. He was not only honing the abilities of these amazing children, but he was also into some crazy experiments, which is why he has a monkey butler in the first place.
Yeah.
Chimpanzee butler, who speaks perfect English. So, what do you have to say about Luther? Do you know?
Luther. Right. So you saw the TV show, and I just read the comics.
Of course you did.
Yeah, but for the most part, for Luther, I always found him as, despite all his strength and his mental focus and so on, he had a bit of a inferiority complex. But his inferiority complex was mostly on the part of, like, he thinks of himself as not being good enough for his position, being number one and leader of the team. It's not really, in the comic, it wasn't really as fleshed out. It was like kind of hidden, but you knew it was there and you knew it was an issue for him. But he dealt with it pretty well and come to terms with it quite a bit.
Well, being number one, that puts a lot of weight.
Yeah.
On your shoulders. You have to be the team leader. You have to be the fast thinker.
Yeah.
The decision maker.
Yeah, exactly. And for the most part, I found that he actually filled the shoes quite well, which when I was reading the comic, made me feel like you don't really need to have that inferiority complex, but at the same time, I feel like it also helped him actually not to become too complacent. Like it's also part of the reason why he was so good at leading them, because he didn't come like, yeah, I'm number one, I'm the best, and then he gets complacent and he might not strategize or lead the team properly, so he didn't make those kind of weird mistakes, even though, like, there are things that have happened that he takes on the blame for himself as well. But I feel that he's a good leader, and there was points where he did have certain suspicions because of certain events and stuff like that. And plus, at least in the comic for me, he did try to be the center of everybody, try and bring them back, bringing the peace and so on. And for the most part, he did actually quite a good job. He was actually quite good at being number one in the comics.
He is really good at keeping calm.
Yeah.
But there are certain brothers of his that know how to push his buttons, and it is quite something when this guy gets violent. I don't know about the comic, but in the TV series, one of the vulnerabilities I noticed is that when he gets injured, it seems to hurt him quite a bit. And I'm not talking about just being hit, I'm talking about being lacerated with a knife.
Oh, yeah.
And his blood is blue as well. I'm guessing that has something to do with the serum.
Yeah.
And how his DNA was modified. But he is definitely one of my top favorites.
Yeah.
So
from what I've seen with the show, like the trailers and the pilot, I guess, it's the only real thing that kind of got me with it was that the show pretty much just gives straight to them being older, and so which is kind of different because in the comics it spends a little bit more time with them being kids. So I got used to them seeing their upbringing and so on a little bit more than than in the show, which was great because it gave a bit more background and you get to see exactly how tight knit they were, and it made the time jump make a little bit more sense when they're adults, because you get to see where everybody was before, and you can sort of see how things developed to where they are now. Just a little bit more clarity, and you get the motivations are a bit more clear as well with some of the characters. I'm not really sure what happened in the show. I'm quite sure that they got everybody's motivations shown clear, I'm suspecting. But as far as I can tell from the comics, it's just, I don't know, the more time they spend in childhood, just, I don't know, I guess it just helped it a little bit more for me in terms of storytelling wise. And you could see, even when they were kids, you could actually see who was gonna not like who, and who had issues with whom, and how they interacted was basically foreshadowing how they were gonna end up in the future, despite them working together and still having that family dynamic that they had. But you could clearly see where things were gonna go when they're gonna be adults. So when you saw the time jump, you're like, yep, that's pretty much where they were gonna go, and you can see how it ended up there. So it kind of hit a few plot holes that may occur from not spending enough time with them when they were still kids and growing up and so on. And you get to see a lot more of their father, Sir Reginald, as it were. You get to see him. You get to see a bit more into his character, as you see how he was actually handling the kids, and you get to get a little bit more understanding as to what's going on with this guy, what's his motivations, and get a bit more clued in a little better into finding out what's really going on with him and the kids, and why he adopted the kids and all that stuff. But as far as I can tell, it was a good comic for me personally. I definitely did like number one in the comic as a character. So I like that. Yeah, I'm cool with number one.
Yeah, I really, really like number one. So now we're going to move on to our next focus, which is Klaus. Klaus is also he's a favorite of mine, because he is just crazy and weird, and I think a lot of people can identify with him,
Right.
to an extent, because his superpower is that, or powers, is that he is basically a medium, but when watching the show, it was not so much a thing of him looking for spirits to talk to, but spirits actually coming to him because they knew he could communicate with them. And Klaus is only able to do this, he's only able to communicate with them when he's sober. So he is basically a functioning alcoholic, drug addict, crazy person.
Yeah.
And it's really sad how he got to that point, because when he was a child, Sir Reginald would basically lock him in a dark room for hours and hours and hours and force him to face his fears. And I don't think that approach really worked at all.
Well, sometimes exposure therapy is the way to go.
Exposure and immersion therapy. But in this case, it did the complete opposite and made him just want to avoid his abilities as much as possible.
Yeah.
And sadly, this leads him down the typical road of a junkie, stealing and doing whatever to get his next high.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, actually. And that's why I say I feel like there is a bit of a relatable ness for some people, maybe not all people, but some. And later on in the series, he has to face this. He sobers up and he, is not so fearful anymore. But it's more of something he needed to do. He had to do this because at the end of the day, they're trying to save the world.
Yeah.
And he needs to communicate with their father to get information.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what else he can do is he is actually able to temporarily bring a spirit to the physical world, just for a short time, just to maybe help out with something, some action-packed scene or something like that. And we see this in the last episode, but I won't tell you what happens or who it was. But in other episodes, you notice he, at certain times, can bring them through just for a little bit, and they can actually physically move objects or help out in certain situations. And that's basically what I'm willing to discuss about the extent of his powers, because I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah.
But as a character, he definitely has a place in the group dynamics. He is the funny one. He is the quirky one, and the not taking life too serious one. But it's all it's all rooted in a lot of sadness, actually.
Right.
So yeah, he he has his own little time travel experience, and that comes along later as a big help to get the rest of the siblings to actually believe that they are time traveling.
Right. Uh, I don't really remember him much from the comics, to be honest. But I do know he did play a really large role in one of the storylines that I read, and yeah, I can really get into that because it'll go against what Storm Cool is trying to do by not revealing too much for those of you who wanna watch the show. But yeah, he man, it was just yeah, it was a crazy character in the comics. Um, from what I can remember, he was not all there in the beginning, but as the story kind of continued on, he actually started to be a little bit more. I don't want to say assertive, I guess. Like he started to be more useful in a way. He actually started using his powers and being more actually just getting away from the whole functioning alcoholic kind of vibe and actually sobering up. That's making him much more you know useful with his powers, and he actually gains better control of his powers and delving deeper into his powers and what he can actually do, and really getting down to what his powers potential can actually be, the true potential of his powers, really. And yeah, that's basically all we can really say about Klaus for now. So you have to watch the show and read the comics to get a lot more information on him, because it's just more interesting that way, much more exciting, more value for your entertainment pleasure, as it were.
So right now I'd like to mix things up a little bit and actually talk about the villains in this show.
Okay.
And the two main villains were Cha-Cha and Hazel. And they work for this corporation, this company that seems to mainly exist in the future. Well, okay, they exist throughout time, but they're operating from a time in the future after this event has gone down, this world-destroying event, trying to change the past. And they have individual time-traveling briefcases, and let's just find them on Wikipedia. So, Cha-Cha is the lady character, and there's not much to say about her on here. I have to read it first. They're basically time-traveling hitmen, and anytime the timeline is changed or altered or whatever, it's their jobs to go back in time and make sure people who die or are supposed to die actually do die when they died. And it's pretty creative. If you go into some of the more in-depth missions, they get quite creative, because they can't just go back in time and kill somebody. They need it to almost happen naturally. and they will sort of set a line of events into action. Like someone gets food poisoning, for example, in a time when food poisoning was not so easily cured. Things like that. And then we also have Hazel. He is the guy character, the man.
Yeah.
And they wear these masks so that they cannot be identified. And he wears this teddy bear mask, and Hazel wears a dog mask, and they're brightly colored, so as to not get identified. And they are basically enslaved to this corporation. They're working off time there. The more work they do, the sooner they can retire, and their retirement packages are very, very enticing. Usually a lot of money involved. They get to live in a safe time period of their choosing, where nothing bad can really happen to them.
Right.
And when you watch the show, you will see that these two, particularly, they're not really. I don't want to say they're not bad guys, because they are. But if you get to know their personalities, get to see what they're like, they're not actually just in it for the job. They have like dreams and desires, and they want to live normal lives.
It's a job, man. You know, you gotta make your money and move on.
But basically,
it's nothing personal.
Once you start working for this agency of time traveling assassins, you are locked in. You cannot just leave.
Yeah.
You work for them for a predetermined amount of time, and any attempt to leave them will result in you being hunted down and taken out.
Yeah. I've seen them in the comics popping in here and there, as I remember, and I've seen some of their more creative styles of getting the job done and making sure that certain people die when they need to die, and make it look like it just happened.
It just happened.
Yeah, and they left no traces. And when I read the comics and so on, I didn't really, I didn't get that thing of like they're evil as well. When I was reading it, I was like, these are just two people who are working, doing their jobs, and they just wanna, finish it off, get to retirement, and
just live happy,
just live
peaceful
their
lives.
Yeah. I mean, if you went for the jobs, I find like, yeah, man, they'd just be normal people, just living ordinary lives, doing ordinary things, and just living it, and, just dealing with normal day stresses, paying the bills and all that. So, I personally could not see them as, the bad guys. And also, I know like the company they work for is pretty, overlordy in its ways, but what they're doing by preserving the time stream, I find that to be a noble thing. Sure, they could go about it in a much, nicer way and not so overlord about it, but for me, I just find like it was they went super strict to ensure that things don't just fall apart on them. Basically, nobody takes any shortcuts, and ensure that the time stream, because time stream is a very sensitive thing.
Because because if we could break away to an Ashton Kutcher movie called The Butterfly Effect,
Yeah.
we can clearly see that the smallest event can change or majorly impact the future.
Yeah.
But that's a podcast for another time.
Yeah. So I totally understand the motivations and why they are the way they are. So I personally just see them as more of as an adversary, but not in the sense of they are the bad guys, you know?
They have a job to do and they do it.
Yeah,
That's it. It's nothing personal.
Yeah, it's just the basic story. There's a protagonist and an antagonist, and sometimes in a story, the protagonist isn't necessarily the good guy. I mean, look at Avengers: Infinity War. Thanos is clearly the protagonist in that story. He is. Who's the main character in the story? It's him. When you look at it, you'll see you spend more time getting to know Thanos
From a certain point of view.
and he's got more screen time than most everybody else. He's the one who's on a journey to accomplish a certain task. Everybody else is there to try and stop him. Just like how you see in most other stories, when the hero goes, he's on the journey to accomplish a task, and the bad guy is always trying to stop him. Here in Infinity Warfare, he's trying to accomplish a task, and the Avengers are trying to stop him. See what I did there? They flipped the role. I'm not saying the Avengers are the bad guys. I'm saying they are the antagonists. Antagonist is not necessarily the bad guy. It does not equate to villain. Okay? It just so happens to
I see what you
often than
did
not.
there. I see what you did there, but still,
Yeah, I know. It's
complicated.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, for my example here, like, I don't see this corporation and these guys, Hazel and Chacha, as villains. I see them as just, antagonists, just, the challenge that the heroes need to overcome. That's all it is. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying, man. That's all I'm saying.
Yay! Back on track. Whew. Gotta clear the cache there for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
So next in line we have Diego, and Diego is
Oh yeah, the knife guy.
he is the knife guy, and he is probably Luther's main rival within the group. These two fight and argue just about any given opportunity they get in the series. And what he can do, he's really good with knives.
Yeah.
Like he can curve the trajectory of a projectile.
Yeah, so technically it's not necessarily just knives, it's just that knives are,
Yeah, projectiles.
projectiles. But you can use anything and you can curve it. As long as he's doing it, he'll curve it. It's just that knives, they're just, better at cutting than stabbing.
He's a master of the martial arts, and he is in peak human physical condition. And for some time, if I remember correctly, he was actually in the police force, but as of now, not so much.
Yeah.
And along with that rivalry thing, I think, because he is number 2 in the group, and I think that's where a lot of the rivalries
conflicts
come in, because if you've seen the series or have yet to watch the series, you will notice he is very good at what he does. He is also very good at making quick decisions, conflict resolution with bad guys, not with Luther, and he sees a task, and that's all that matters at that moment in time.
Yeah.
He will stop at nothing to achieve what is in front of him. So he's also a bit of a detective. He obsesses over current events, like for example, trying to find out, more information about their father's death.
Yeah.
And so on. But overall, I wouldn't say he is too much of a focal point in the series. He's, when everybody else has screen time, he is somewhere digging deep for information.
Yeah.
And they do bring that up every now and then. They do focus on him. But he does not have one of the more interesting superpowers. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you're good at throwing stuff. That's great.
The whole curving detector things that he throws, which is nice, just reminds me of that movie Wanted.
Yes, curving the bullet.
Yeah. But for some reason, when I think about him in the comics, I remember hating him.
Ah, yes, controversy.
Yeah, I just remember hating him for his. I think it was like
he's arrogant.
Yeah, the way he interacted mostly with Luther in the comic, I just found that was unnecessary. Was like just hating on him.
The constant one-upmanship.
Yeah, it got kind of annoying, and in the comic, Luther really tried to patch things up with him. Was really trying to not be antagonistic with him as much. Was actually trying to like build bridges, especially in the flash forward when they skip time jump when they're adults. He actually tries to, hey man, let's sort out whatever it is. And as I might be mismemories, but I do remember a point where even Luther was like, he didn't choose the number one position.
Yeah, it was assigned.
Yeah, so, and all he could do was make the best of the fact that he was the number one guy and did all he could. So it's not that Luther just took number one, it's just that he had to be number one.
He
because
fought harder for it. I mean,
yeah, and he was given number one, so he made himself become worthy of it. Which is something that he himself has a inferiority complex of having, that he's not really sure that he actually is worthy of it in itself. So, but Luther did try his best in the comic, at least, to, pass things out. And I think there was a point where they actually sort of got to a point where they weren't as antagonistic anymore. That's as far as I can go with.
Yeah,
him
look,
at this
we
point.
didn't get as much background for him in the series as the other characters. So, great character, but not as much in the spotlight as some of the others.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure if the series continues on, we'll get a bit more insight into each of the characters, and we might get more into number 2.
So the last character I would like to mention in this episode is Ben,
Oh yeah.
who is number 6 in the ranks, and Ben, you don't actually see.
Oh yeah.
And that's because earlier on in life, he went somewhere else.
Oh yeah.
So what Ben can do, and he made it rather clear that he doesn't really enjoy doing this, but he can summon.
Oh yeah.
He can summon eldritch tentacles from a portal in his stomach.
Oh yeah.
And the bits of this that you do see are usually behind closed doors, or windowed areas, because it's brutal.
Oh yeah.
It's basically when you see him for the first time, this is what he does. This is how he gets introduced in the whole bank robbery scene. And I can see Unreal Dean is really, really happy to talk about Ben. So I'm going to give you the floor.
Nah, it's look, Ben is a really interesting character for me personally, because like I said, in the comic you get a little more time with the characters when they're kids, and you get to see a little bit more of Ben and his stomach adventures. And let me tell you, there are some tentacle action that's wonderful, and he uses it to great effect as well. He saves a lot of people with his tentacles, does a lot of stuff with it, and he doesn't really like doing it much, but when he was a kid, he was quite useful with it. And even as an adult, it actually helped quite a lot with them as well. But no, man, Ben is just great, man. I just love his power. It's just like the weirdness of it is great, But he has a closer relationship with Klaus, and they're pretty tight, as brothers, and I just liked his dynamic there with Klaus. It was quite nice and heartwarming. It was a good. It was kind of weird, like how this kid, who was fairly normal, interacts with this drug-addled guy, and it was nice. I liked how they played off each other, and I feel like he also had a nice influence on getting Klaus to sober up a bit.
Yeah, well, there is actually a scene, and this is not a spoiler, but there is a scene when Klaus wants to, he's sober and he wants to become the opposite of that. And Ben actually smacks the substance out of his hand. So there's just an example of Klaus, his abilities. So if you think about it, Klaus is the only one that could have enabled that to happen. So there was probably a big part of him that actually did not want to be under the influence.
Yeah.
And that enabled Ben to interact with him just long enough to stop him.
Yeah. Plus, Klaus talks to Ben quite a lot as well. In this whole spirit thing. But yeah, man, and it also shows just how close of a relationship they have. That it was Ben who came to help him out and everything. So yeah, I mean, it was just I just like Ben, man. I know a lot of people would just see him as just some character that's there, part of the plot line, and not really pay much mind to him. But I don't know, I just liked him, man. It was good. And I liked his power. I just wish you could see more of it. That's all. Yeah. That's a good character. Really like him. Yeah.
So, I think we can conclude part 1 of the Umbrella Academy
Yeah.
podcast.
With the Cthulhu stomach.
And I ended on Ben because he is quite an epic character.
Yeah.
He is a very undermined character, but when you watch the show, or if you have watched the show, you will see he is an awesome character. And in part 2, we'll also be ending with an epic character, but you'll have to tune in next time to hear all about that.
Oh yeah.
So until next time, I've been Storm Cool.
And I've been Unreal Dean. Later days.